What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast and the Believe Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com, and we are fresh off the first game action of the 2024-25 season for these new-look rebuilding Nets. They opened the preseason yesterday in San Diego against the Los Angeles Clippers. They lost 115-106, but today's podcast is going to be reacting to that and answering some mailbag questions from fans with CJ Holmes of the New York Daily News, another reporter on the Nets beat who does a great job joining me to talk about all of that. But before that, some quick housekeeping. The Nets did have some injury news this week that Day'Ron Sharpe and Trendon Watford have hamstring strains and said that Day'Ron Sharpe will be reevaluated in 6 weeks. So an extended absence that will carry Sharpe well into the season, and a little bit of a blow to the Nets front court, and an injury that, eliminates some difficult rotation decisions and some questions that Jordi Fernandez may have had. Trendon Watford will be reevaluated in 2 weeks. Nick Claxton missed last night's preseason game with hamstring soreness. He did travel with the team, but the extent of the injury is still unknown. It's not clear whether or not he's going to play in the preseason games yet. So definitely something to monitor, but we'll be reacting to this preseason game with CJ, also answering all those fan questions on Cam Thomas, Ben Simmons, even Zaire Williams, some of the Nets back-end guys, what we saw from all of them and what we're expecting as the Nets get closer to that season opener on October 23rd in Atlanta. If you guys don't already, please make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube at my channel, Erik Slater NBA, please hit that like button, comment. It does a lot to drive up engagement, so I can really appreciate it if you take the time to do that. If you're listening on a podcast, leave a review, subscribe, do all of that. It really helps me try to get this channel off the ground and keep giving you guys this Nets content that I know that, we all want throughout the season. So please do that if you can. Hope you guys enjoy the talk with CJ, reacting to the preseason action and answering questions after the theme music. And I'm joined now by CJ Holmes of the New York Daily News. And CJ, we are fresh off of the Nets' first preseason game of the year, a 115-106 loss to the Los Angeles Clippers in San Diego. And, we're going to be giving some takeaways before answering some questions from fans. But first, CJ, were you able to watch the game last night? Because I think all the Nets fans know that League Pass was not run as smoothly as you would hope or cooperating last night.
Yeah, eventually I was panicking for a second, right when the game started. As I'm sitting here and it's like 10:30, then it's 10:40, and I'm sitting there like, where's the game, man? And then all of a sudden, this game is not being broadcast, pops up on League Pass, and I immediately call my boss and start panicking. And literally halfway through my conversation with my boss, the game comes on to Dorian Finney-Smith throwing it down off the dish from Ben Simmons. So that's when I checked in, I'm just like everyone else. So
yeah, and I mean, people like to make jokes about there being no Nets fans, but I mean, I guess if there are Nets fans, there's a contingent that's very loyal, because I saw a lot of panic on Twitter over a Nets preseason game that was at 10:30 East Coast time, and people were, ready to, call the cops because this thing wasn't on TV. So before we get into it, let's just talk about the fact that the broadcast was trash. I don't know what that was, but it's pretty ridiculous that an NBA preseason game isn't being televised, and then they finally get it on, and it's weird, arena music in the background. There's no play-by-play. The camera angles are terrible. I was trying to watch for things I was looking for, and I was just thrown off by how terrible it was.
Yeah, it was the arena. It was the arena broadcast. I tried reaching out to the league last night and this morning just to figure out, what was up with the hiccup. Still haven't got anything back. Got some people looking into it, but in terms of consuming the game, right? I mean, it definitely makes you pay attention more, right? You don't have the play-by-play in the background, kind of breaking things down for you. So, casual viewers got a chance to really watch the game, more intently last night. So I guess, if there is a silver lining, there's that. But, hearing all this Dua Lipa and all this stuff definitely definitely not ideal, but I guess it's better than nothing, right?
All right, let's get to our takeaways from this game. Obviously, Nick Claxton, Daron Sharp, Trendon Watford, Killian Hayes also were out for the Nets. The Clippers were without Kawhi Leonard, and it didn't start out pretty. I think the Nets were down 11-0 out of the gate, but they came back and they made this one competitive fairly quickly and then into the second half. So, CJ, what were your top takeaways from the Nets' first action?
Yeah, man. I guess you got to start with Ben Simmons, right, and how he looked. Well, limited action, played what was it, like 13 minutes, something around there.
Like 16 or 17, I thought.
Yeah, around there, right? And he left the game. The game ended with him just as healthy as he started, right? So that's a win for the Nets. But and obviously we it kind of feels like we do this every year, but Chris Brickley said that Ben Simmons was in all-star form, right? James Harden looked like he was in all-star form in limited action last night. Ben Simmons, it was a lot of what we saw last year. Like, he's still impactful, at both ends of the court, but it's not that it wasn't anything dominant. Granted, it's just one preseason game. He is coming off of another major surgery, so obviously some rust would be expected. But overall, it was a lot more of the same. His play didn't scream all-star level, but I did like some of his passes. His vision for the game is still unmatched when he's on his shit, right? And he was getting in passing lanes, had a couple of deflections, was pushing the pace. Nets were playing 5 out with him on the court, letting him be kind of the central hub in that offense and create for others around him. So, in terms of Jordy's vision, I see the vision, but in terms of overall impact, like I didn't see an all-star player last night.
I definitely didn't, and I mean, if we're to be fair, there might have been a couple of games that we've seen all-star impact from Ben Simmons throughout his Nets tenure, but briefly to touch on Ben, because I don't want to go too deep into Ben, because it seems like we just talk about him way too much given what his actual significance is to this team long term. But, once it was clear, my first question entering the season was, is Ben Simmons even going to be on this team, like during the offseason? Then it was made clear that he is. My next question then was, what is his role? Is he starting like he did last year? How are the Nets going about this, given the fact that he probably doesn't factor into their long-term timeline whatsoever? And, Jordy's made it clear throughout training camp that they intend to feature him as a focal point of the rotation. And likely, they said he'll compete with it for Dennis Schroeder, but likely that he'll be the starting point guard. Now, because Nick Claxton was forced out last night, that made Jordy's decision a little bit easier. He played Ben alongside Dennis Schroeder in a 5-out lineup, as you said, with Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, and Cam Thomas. And my question has been, are the Nets going to try to play him alongside Nick Claxton again? Because they did it last year. It was brief. Jordy says that, you can't take anything from that sample size. It was only 100 minutes, but it looked terrible in the minutes that they did play together. I don't think that that's a recipe to set anybody up for success just based on the fact that Ben, doesn't want to shoot in the half court, and he doesn't want, he's not a floor spacer, obviously, but the way that he wants to play conflicts with the way that Nick Claxton plays. And I think that was evident last night, because while he was playing center in a 5-out offense, a point center, like a transition ball handler, but a half-court screener and roller, if you look at what Ben did, like you said, it's more of the same of what we saw last year. It's a lot of back to the basket. It's a lot of, just kind of spamming dribble handoff to people, getting the ball in that mid post with his back to the hoop, looking for some, backdoor cutters and stuff. And that's fine if it's in a 5-out offense. But if you have Nick Claxton in the game, what is Nick Claxton doing while Ben Simmons is there? Is he standing in the short corner and clogging up the lane? What is Ben Simmons doing while Nick Claxton is screening in the pick and roll? And what we've seen it be is he's standing in the short corner, clogging up the lane and taking away the roll to the basket. So, it's Ben's first game back in over 7 months, because as you
said, right?
He was fine. Like it is what it is. Like I'm not, it's his first game back. He's going to need much more time to get acclimated. But I just think that it is, indicative of more of the same of what we saw last year in terms of the way that he wants to play. And the way that he wants to play is not looking for his shot really whatsoever. And obviously that's going to conflict in the half court when you put him alongside a non-shooting center like Nick Claxton. And I also think that it was, you weren't here during the first half of last year, but I actually do think it was interesting because Ben told us during training camp this year, he told us that last year during training camp, he was playing with a herniated disc. And he was saying that he played, he feels much better this year than he did last year. I remember in Ben's first preseason game last year, one of the first times he had the ball, he drove right into LeBron James's chest and laid it in. And then he had another play where he cut to the basket and finished really aggressively towards the rim. And I remember when that happened, I was like, okay, like maybe this is a different Ben Simmons. And that was supposedly, he's saying that was with a herniated disc in that first preseason game last year. This year, I thought he looked a lot more tentative, and he's supposedly healthier. So, as usual, like there's some conflicting ideologies at play there, and I don't think a lot of it's adding up. But at the end of the day, like it's Ben Simmons' first game in over 7 months. He's going to be a part of this rotation. I just think that it's clear that it's only one game, but like this is now we're going on, this is going to be the third year of seeing Ben play a certain way. And I think that it's very evident that that way does not line up with the way that the Nets have to play with a non-shooting center like Nick Claxton if they want to be anywhere near successful in a half-court offense. And it's not like this team has the shot creation to be successful with, even more so limiting the shot creation because, it's just not a good look for the team. And I think that it's not going to take Jordy long to go away from it, as it didn't take, Jock Vaughn long, as it didn't take whoever else has been coaching the team. But another takeaway, you said Ben Simmons, something that I want to get into quickly is just obviously Cam Thomas, because I thought that Cam Thomas looked very good. And I thought that, the way that the Nets used him was noteworthy because Jordi Fernandez obviously has spoken about wanting to make Cam more efficient this year. And while the Nets lack a lot of shot creation, lack really any shot creation outside of Cam, that's going to stem on trying to get him clean looks, in the flow of the offense and not making him be so much of an ISO one-on-one guy. He's going to have to do that because the Nets don't have shot creators, but trying to limit it as much as you can. And we saw, Cam play both on and off the ball, but it had a lot of off-ball time in his minutes with the first unit.
Yeah, did a lot of his damage off the ball. Catch and shoot threes.
Yep.
He looked good out there. He looked good, man. I mean, Jordy said he wants to see efficiency. I mean, obviously it's preseason, it's a small sample size, but 3 for 5, 12 points, and 16 or something minutes of action. Yeah. That's pretty damn good. So
yeah,
he has to keep that up.
Like you said, he hit 2 threes. They were both, catch and shoot threes. Very quick trigger. It's something that I highlighted last season. I've continued to highlight into this season is Cam's catch and shoot 3-point ability as a floor spacer, because he shot career high close to 44% on catch and shoot threes last year. And that's something that down the line, I'm going to keep saying it, if he's going to play next to a, tier 1A superstar eventually and try to be on a playoff team or even a superstar at all, he's going to have to play off the ball, and he's going to have to do things and round out the supporting aspects of his game that can make him successful in a little bit more of a supporting role like that. And catch and shoot threes is a big one. We're going to have to see him make some improvements on the defensive end of the floor this year. We'll see how that pans out. But I thought Cam did what Jordi Fernandez has been talking about in the conversations that they've had, which is playing off the ball a little bit when you get the ball, making quick decisions, whether in transition or the flow of the offense. I thought we saw that, and I thought that, it's encouraging because something that I'm watching with Cam this year is it's going to be tempting to just give into the temptation of going one-on-one, chucking up shots because there's so little shot creation on this team. But if he can resist and try to maintain or build his efficiency somewhat, I think that's a very positive sign for him and for the Nets coaching staff to get a look at maybe what he can be, past this tanking, iteration of the team. CJ, any more takeaways before we get into some fan questions?
Yeah, Zaire Williams looked great, man. He looked great. Acquired in July via Memphis. Second chance here in Brooklyn. I think, he's one of the guys that's like, viewing this as a second draft, right? And he took advantage of his minutes, last night. He was moving well without the ball, finishing strong at the rim. His length and activity really changed the game for the Nets there in the second quarter, especially defensively, and, as Jordi Fernandez continues to, finalize his rotations, entering the regular season, Zaire Williams has made a pretty strong case for why he should be playing extended minutes on the wing. I really, really liked his minutes last night.
Yeah, I think Zaire was Definitely a resounding positive in this game. He had 10 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists defensively, 3 steals and a block, was 5 of 9 from the field. Most of those are layups, but, you know, he was team high plus 10 in 23 minutes. He came in the second quarter, and the Nets really ramped up their defensive intensity and, you know, climbed out of an 18-point hole. And, you know, when you're looking at a player like Zaire, like, this is a guy that a former top 10 pick, so he has, you know, pedigree, obviously. Didn't work out in Memphis. We've heard him, you know, kind of air some grievances he had there, but comes in here and he's a guy who has tools. Like the Nets got him, and they got him and a second-round pick basically for free because the Grizzlies were trying to cut salary. And, you know, we all know like the struggles he had in Memphis. He's, you know, his offensive skill set did not develop the way they wanted it to. He shot 30% from 3 over his 3 seasons there. Wasn't great putting the ball on the floor, but he's still a guy who's 6'9", got a 6'10" wingspan. He's athletic, has a lot of bounce. I think that was evident last night. He's fast. And, you know, he has tools that if you can figure out a way to get some more out of his offensive game, there's like concrete skills on the defensive end of the floor that I think will translate very well to impacting games. So for a guy you're getting for free, like you can't ask for much more than that if you're the Nets. And, you know, obviously, like, it's going to be tough for the coaching staff. They have to try to fix his three-point shot somewhat if he's going to be, you know, featured in real rotations down the line, like for contending teams. They're going to have to try to, you know, make him somewhat of a threat attacking closeouts and things along those lines. But, like, he's got tools, that's for sure. And it seems like based off of the effort, like from an effort standpoint to you, was there anybody who stuck out more than him last night?
Well, you know, Dorian Finney-Smith was up there.
It's always Dorian.
You know, that's what, you know, that's what he does, though. That's what Doe does. But yeah, Zaire, he bought it in every aspect, stuffed the stat sheet, and I was really impressed with his energy and effort in his 23 minutes on the court.
Yeah, so, you know, it seems like he's coming in with a good headspace, and this coaching staff has an opportunity with him. He's entering the final year of his contract, and I think that he's a guy who, you know, there were questions like, you know, entering the year with all the guys that the Nets had, potentially the veterans in the rotations, there were questions about whether or not he, you know, might be like that odd man out as like the 10th or 11th man who might be on the outside looking in to begin. Day'Ron Sharpe and Trendon Watford are out. Sharpe's out for at least 6 weeks. Watford, they said 2. So that looks like it's going to give Williams a chance. And he's a guy that I think it's really realistic to see the Nets be able to extend him on a reasonable number past this season and then try to work to see if they can, you know, turn him into something more. So having him cost controlled beyond this year, you know, and be able to try to develop his skill set, that seems like a win for the Nets, saying this after one preseason game. So we'll see, but you know, gotta pick your battles of things you can get excited about with the Nets this year. So Zaire Williams is definitely one. Let's get to the questions now. We have a bunch. A lot of people. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions on Twitter or emailing me. First one on the topic of Day'Ron Sharpe, because he is out. With Day'Ron Sharpe out 6 weeks, it leaves Nick Claxton as the only center on the roster. Do you think the Nets have a plan on giving Clowney or Ben Simmons minutes at the center spot, or will they consider bringing someone else in? That's from Cashspiracies and Flopaganda. Great name. CJ, I'll let you take the reins on that one.
I mean, unless they can get an expiring contract somewhere, I mean, I think they have no choice but to play Noah Clowney and Ben Simmons at the 5. And I'm starting to question, you know, what's going on with Nick Claxton. I think there was a report out of San Diego yesterday that Claxton may not play the entire preseason, and the goal is to have him available for opening night, right?
Yeah, Brian Lewis, New York Post reported that. Jordy said that doesn't mean he's not going to play in the preseason, but at least how Brian wrote it, the tone sounded like we could be looking at a little bit longer of an absence than they let on initially. But
I mean, you know how many times I've heard, especially covering the Warriors, how many times I heard not a big deal, and it's like a guy will be out for like a freaking month, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with the current injury situation, the Nets have no choice but to play Ben Simmons and Noah Clowney at the 5, and you know, depending on what they're trying to do, I don't think they're really worry that much, you know? So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I don't really think that
kind of is what it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's any urgency for a tanking team to go out and bring another center in, especially when, you know, I mean, they have three guys. Like if Claxton comes back, they have Claxton, they have Clowney, they have Simmons, all guys who can play center. So I don't think they'll be worried about that. And regardless, like they're tanking, so I don't think they're going to be worried. But, you know, I think the interesting question becomes, we know Nick Claxton's going to start at center. Who is playing the bulk of the center minutes, you know, as his backup between, is it Noah Clowney or is it Ben Simmons? Because I think both Clowney and Simmons will get minutes in that role as they did last night. But, you know, the more, like, I think it's clear that Noah Clowney is going to be a power forward. Like, that's his primary position. That's a position where he has the most upside moving forward. I think that's the position where myself and a lot of Nets fans want to see him play. And I just think if you're going to feature Simmons in the rotation, like, I think that should be Simmons' primary role coming off the bench. I wrote about it coming into the season. I just think it makes the most sense because I've beaten, this is like beating a dead horse at this point with how often I've said this, but the Simmons-Claxton pairing, I just don't think works. So then what's the next logical role for Ben Simmons to play with this team this year? I think, you know, backup coming off the bench, captaining second units as kind of this small ball five who's a point center, handling the ball in transition versus screening and rolling in the half court in a 5-out lineup like we saw last night. Like, that's the role that makes the most sense, because not only does it maximize Simmons and put him at his best and allow him to push the ball and spray to shooters and then mitigate his limitations in the half court, it also elevates everybody else around him, because when you're in the half court, you don't have to worry about there being two non-shooters, you clogging the paint, people being allowed to double and put you in all these bad situations. You have a guy who's in the middle of the paint who can roll and can, you know, find other shooters out of the short roll, can do things like that. And then they have the transition aspect of it. I just think that, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like that's the most sense. That's the role that makes the most sense for him. I think Jordy, and I think what Jock Vaughn and the Nets were hoping last year, why they keep going back to this Simmons-Claxton pairing potentially, is they know the lack of shot creation they have in the half court. They might be saying, we're going to be bad in that half anyway. If we can have Simmons and Claxton and some of these other guys out there, we have some length and athleticism on the defensive end to maybe get stops, create turnovers, rebound the ball, and then open, you know, up transition opportunities. But I just think it's so debilitating in the half court that I don't think that it's worth it at all. You know, what's your take on that?
No, I agree, man. Definitely got to find some spacing somewhere.
Yeah,
definitely got to find some spacing somewhere. You know, you hope that a guy like Noah Clowney can, you know, he shot the three ball decently towards the end of last season. You're hoping that he can continue to make strides in that area. And like you said, really establish himself as a four in this league. But, you know, right now with the injuries piling up right now, and that's kind of just got to fit guys in where they can, you know, put a respectable product out there on the court. So, so yeah.
All right, next question. Will Cam Thomas get a chance to run point guard this year, or is he going to end up turning into a spot-up two guard for the rest of the season? That is from the Plight of Nets Fans, and that's a great and accurate Twitter handle. CJ, your opinion there?
Yeah, he'll get some reps at point guard. We saw a couple, you know, I think he had like a 2-3 minute spurt where he was running the point yesterday when Schroeder was off the court. So we'll definitely see some lineups where, you know, Cam's going to have the ball in his hands. But I think, like, overall going forward, Jordy wants him to, you know, become more of an off-the-ball scorer rather than an on-the-ball scorer. But, you know, Cam Thomas is still one of the best shot creators, you know, on this team. So, of course, like, they're going to put him in situations where he has the ball in his hands and can go out there and get a bucket. You know, especially when the situation calls for late game situations, things of that nature. When you got to go get a bucket, you know, put the ball in Cam Thomas's hands.
Definitely agree. And yeah, we saw it last night. Like, he played off the ball with the starting unit. And then, like you said, like Simmons and Schroeder went off the court and he was playing the point for a 3-4 minute stretch with the second unit and some of those reserve guys. And I really like the approach from Jordy Fernandez, because I think the expectation amongst the NBA and a lot of Nets fans was that, like, Cam's usage is just going to go through the roof. Not even usage, just the amount that he has the ball. Like, he's going to be handling the ball all the time. He's going to be dominating it. And while, like, that could very well still happen, like, preseason doesn't always mean a ton. Things change a lot. And I think, you know, Cam's going to have the ball in his hands a lot for this team because he's the only one who can create his own shot consistently. But I had some worries about, you know, was Cam going to play a role this season that he'll really be able to project to long term that isn't, like, unreasonable? Because I think we can all agree that, you know, on a playoff team, at least at this juncture. It depends on how much he develops, but it doesn't seem like Cam is going to be a guy who's just going to dominate the ball for like extreme stretches of games on a team like that. So, you know, getting him experience playing off the ball, getting him comfortable there, and getting an extended look at how that is, you know, before you have to get into contract negotiations, I think that benefits him and that benefits the Nets. Now, does that mean that he's not going to be, you know, going into the pick and roll and, you know, running different like Chicago and zoom actions for him and doing all this different stuff? Like, they're going to be doing all that stuff. But I think that, you know, it's just not having Cam dominate the ball, be at the top of the key, all just high pick and rolls or all ISO for him. Like, I don't think that that's the best situation for him, not because he can't do it, just because I don't think that, you know, you don't want to put too much on his plate for a Nets team that obviously is severely lacking shot creation. So, plight of Nets fans, to answer your question, he'll run some point guard in spots like he did. I think Kevin Ollie did it a lot with him late last year, but he'll do some of that, you know, play off the ball some. And I think that that's a good balance of, you know, how to approach Cam this year. Next question, who is going to be the Nets' second leading scorer behind Cam? That's from Ryan Newman. Interesting question, CJ. What do you think?
I think I think the fact that no one can confidently say, oh, this group of guys are going to be on the roster, you know, come the trade deadline. I think that's kind of hard to figure out, but, you know, it's currently constructed.
Yeah, let's say first half of the season before the trades happen.
Yeah. Like, as currently constructed, I mean, like, who else can go get a bucket? Like Schroeder?
That was my
answer. Like, I mean, like, I guess that would be my pick. I mean, Schroeder's, you know, he's in the quick game with it, so he's going to get his easy buckets and he'll have his scoring nights. But, I mean, you know, I don't see Cam Johnson kind of like taking that leap, right? You know, DFS isn't that guy. So yeah, I think it's gonna have to be straight. In an ideal world, it would be Ben Simmons, right? Like, but we don't live in an ideal world.
Yeah,
you know. So my bet would be Dennis Schroeder or Nick Claxton.
Yeah, we definitely don't live in that world. And yeah, I would say Schroeder, just because of the amount that I think he'll have the ball, the amount of pick and roll reps that I think he's going to get, and a guy who can at least like score at all three levels. Someone like doesn't get to the basket a ton, but he can shoot threes, he can pull up in the mid range, and he can get to the basket on some pick and rolls and in other things. And like outside of that, like I guess if Cam Johnson jacks up his 3-point volume and is shooting like well above 40% from three to start the year, and it's just crazy hot, it could be Cam Johnson. But outside of that, like, I don't think Doe will be in that conversation. I don't think Ben obviously will be in that conversation. And none of the guys off the bench, I think, are going to play enough. Like Clowney at this juncture, I don't think is going to have enough usage to do something like that. So yeah, I guess to me, it's Claxton just as a product of, you know, probably transition and obviously like being a lob threat and things like that. Maybe Cam Johnson because of his 3-point volume, but I think Dennis would be the safest bet there because he's going to have the ball in his hands most. And I think he's the most natural shot creator outside of Cam Thomas. So, yeah, that's how I think both of us would see that. Keeping on the topic of Cam Thomas, it says, do you think the front office will offer a nice contract to Cam Thomas? That's from Vespeto. You know, we talked about Cam's contract. Like I talked about it on my last pod with Brian Lewis, and he's eligible for an extension right now. I think October 21st is the last day that he's able to sign his rookie scale extension with the Nets. But I've explained this in articles, and it makes the most sense for the Nets to hold off, because if they hold off until after this year, they're able to use the cap space that they do have next season, which is a lot. And then they can use Cam's bird rights to exceed the cap and re-sign him. So by waiting, they maximize their cap space. That's all that matters. But at that point, I do think that the Nets will look to extend Cam Thomas, because there's no reason to lose him for nothing. You know, I mean, he's the top player on the team right now, at least from an offensive standpoint, and they're going to need him at least to have some shot creation moving forward. And he's a guy that I think, you know, has some really intriguing tools if he can, you know, continue the growth that we saw last season and develop into a guy who can be more than just a microwave scorer. So, you know, what is that going to look like? That definitely remains to be seen, but I think they'll definitely give him a nice offer, and I think they'll be at the negotiating table next year. CJ, your take?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. Cam's going to get a bag either way. How lucrative that bag is going to be based on how he develops. And like you said, not only makes sense to wait from a cap standpoint, but it makes sense to wait because you want to see what kind of strides he's going to make. Like what his true value is going to be. So, whether it's the Nets or someone else, he's going to get paid. But how much he gets paid just depends on how much he improves over the course of this season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like I've asked people across the league, who work with other teams, like media people, just us talking about it. And the consensus about Cam, I talked about it on my last episode with Brian, is so like scattershot around the league. Like Brian said, he hears some people who love him, thinks he walks on water, and then he hears some people who wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. And I really do think like that's the consensus. Now, do I think Cam can sway some of those non-believers this year? It's going to be tough playing for a team that's going to be this bad, but if he can play the right way and if Jordy can get the most out of him in a role that can be, that you can see being realistic moving forward, I definitely think that he can. And I think that these last 2 seasons, I think he's approaching it with a good attitude. So
that's the thing, man. Cam is so misunderstood around the league.
He really is.
Like he's like a bad locker room guy or a bad attitude guy. He's a great kid. He works hard, and he's been a victim of the circumstances he's been placed in. You know what I'm saying? He was drafted into a situation where he barely saw the court because he had Kyrie, KD, and James Harden eating up all the minutes on the perimeter, and
and to cut you off quickly, even after those guys left, midway through the 2022-23 season, he still didn't see the floor, and they were like very severely lacking shot creation, and Jacque Vaughn still wouldn't play him, and it was
whenever he's been out there, all he has done is get buckets, and that's like a problem, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's just I think he's super misunderstood, and I hope that at some point, all this divisiveness about Cam Thomas can go away, because at the end of the day, he's a great kid. He plays hard. He wants to get better, right? And that's what matters. So,
I
hope that happens for him.
I think the biggest knock on Cam by a lot of people, and I think the reason that there's some of this like negative conversation is he's such a confident guy, and he believes in himself, and he sees himself in a certain light. And like at the end of the day, while like you want it to be reasonable, like that's what you want in a player. You want a player who's confident. You want a player who wants to go out there and wants to contribute and isn't afraid of the moment. And I think if there's one thing that Cam Thomas has proven throughout his Nets tenure, I mean throughout his whole career, but especially his Nets tenure, and impressively because he's been so inconsistent in his role, it's that he's not afraid of the moment. And like at the end of the day, that's a big thing that I would look for in a player is, their confidence level. Are they willing to step up to certain circumstances? And I think there's some guys who clearly are, and there's some guys who clearly aren't. And Cam, fits into one of those categories very clearly. So, I understand like where some of the trepidation and the criticisms of his game were when he entered the league. Like, I don't think he knew what the word pass was when he was at LSU, but he led all freshmen in the country in scoring. And he's
LSU didn't ask him to pass.
Yeah, no, I know. He's
you know what I'm saying? They told him to go out there and do what you do best. You know what I'm saying? They didn't ask him to pass the rock. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's college basketball.
No. I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm just saying from NBA scouts' perspectives, they're looking at a guy who's an undersized guard who, actually didn't shoot well from 3 at LSU. So like coming into the league, there was kind of this, okay, this is a guy who loves to take a ton of shots. He's undersized. He doesn't really play great defense. He didn't shoot great from 3. Like that's not what teams are looking for in today's NBA. But since coming into the league, Cam, has shot only increasingly better from 3. He's proven that he can round out some other aspects of his game in terms of getting to the rim. We saw him improve, slightly, but I thought somewhat significantly as a playmaker towards the end of last season. And if you can buy in on the defensive end a little more, like he's making all the strides that were a lot of the knocks on his game entering the league. And from everything that we've heard talking to him, it only seems like he's going to continue in that direction. And especially
he's only 22 years old, man.
That's the thing, like entering the league now, it's like there's such a everybody wants it right away. Like there's an instant gratification mindset. And I think that's just like our society as a whole at this point. But yeah, like he's 22 years old. And I think a lot of people forget that. I mean, a lot of these guys on this roster, like Zaire's 23, You know, a lot of these guys are very young. Like Dayron's 22. This is his 4th season also. Like guys are a lot younger than they seem. And I think that Cam, you know, has some really intriguing possibilities this season, especially if he can start to build a good rapport and have a good relationship with Jordi Fernandez and his head coach, which is something that, you know, while I don't think it was, you know, contentious very much so, I think it's pretty easy to see that it wasn't the best situation between him and the prior head coaches that were on the Nets. So if he can get that going for him, I think that can only aid in the development and, you know, getting the most out of him in the areas of his game that you want to keep growing. But moving on, do you think the veterans will be traded eventually in the season? That's from Bedstuy98. CJ, I think we both have the same answer to this.
Absolutely. It's only a matter of time. I mean, you know, even though the Nets as currently constructed still aren't expected to be that good, those veterans still raise the ceiling of this team. And if the goal truly is to bottom out, those guys got to go, not only to, you know, clear up cap space going forward, but to, you know, get these young guys some experiences and make sure you finish low in the standings if that is the goal. So I do think it's only a matter of time. You know, obviously, you know, moving someone like Ben Simmons is tricky given the situation, but I think guys like Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder, I think they can I think sooner rather than later they're going to find themselves elsewhere.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's the expectation, you know, amongst people around the Nets and amongst the entire league, because it just makes sense from, like, I think this team, I think we saw last night that, like, this team is going to be really bad either way. Now, will trading those guys help them bottom out to truly getting that worst record in the league where it guarantees that the lowest your pick can be is 5th? Yeah, I do think it can help, but, like, they're going to be bad either way. And it also just makes sense to trade these guys from the standpoint of they don't match up with the timeline, and they're guys that can, while I don't think it's going to be the return that a lot of Nets fans are hoping for, like, they'll get you something. You know, they'll get you some kind of draft asset or some kind of potential young player. So it just makes sense. I think that we've said that Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith are the two guys that make the most sense to be traded, you know, are the most likely to be traded. I think, you know, people have been saying that, you know, I see a lot of stuff like, oh, if Ben Simmons plays better, teams will be able to trade for him, potentially, like, use his expiring contract to shed money. And I just don't see that happening because, first, the Nets want Ben's contract to expire so they can open all this cap space that Sean Marks has talked about to us at various points about how important maintaining that flexibility is. So from that standpoint, I don't think they want to take on long-term money for him, because I think they want to just clear that cap space and figure that out next year and use that whether to take on salary dumps for draft picks or to sign other players. They just want to have that option. And second, with Ben making $40 million this year, you know, teams that want to trade for him who are below the first apron have to trade a huge chunk of salary. It's like $24 million. That's if you're below the first apron. If you're above the first apron, which I guess teams like that aren't going to probably be wanting to shed salary, but then you have to match the $40 million altogether, which teams don't have that much salary usually that they're trying to shed. Like, that's a really big number. And I think there's unique situations where that's the case. But yeah, like, I don't think Ben but I think Dorian and Cam are guys that really, I think, could heat up in trade conversations. Around January 15th is the date that I think everybody should be monitoring, because that's like the official start of trade season, when free agents that were signed last year or last offseason can be traded by their new teams. So that's kind of the time where, you know, teams are going to have more mid-sized salaries available to be traded, and teams might get desperate and teams might be willing to overpay somewhat. So I think that that's definitely when trade season will heat up, and I think you'll hear these guys' names in the conversations more. But staying on this topic, next question, is there any team you could see taking both Cam Johnson and DFS back in the trade? Seen so many trades with both separately, but wonder if there's one single team to maximize return. That's from Jim Staggs. See your face, CJ.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I think probably have to end up being separate deals, but I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's not out of.
You could probably speak to the cap of it all.
Yeah,
better than I can, but
it's not out of the realm of possibilities. But, you know, when you're looking at guys like Cam and DFS, like when you're looking at any trade, you have to look at how much salary do the teams have to send back to make the money work. And as I said, if you're below the first apron, I've had these numbers on Johnson and Finney-Smith for a while. If you're below the first apron, you have to trade like $16 million to make a deal for Cam Johnson work. For Dorian Finney-Smith, that number is only $7.3 million. So, that's how much you have to trade. If you combine both of those, that's $23.5 million. So that's a lot of money, to get both of those guys. And then you talk about what the Nets are going to be asking for both of those guys. And that's not even mentioning if you're above the first apron, you have to match the money like 1-for-1. So, you'd have to trade, Johnson's salary plus Finney-Smith's salary to make a deal like that work. And teams aren't going to be doing that. And, just looking at it, like, I think those guys are somewhat duplicative anyway. Like, I don't think they have different skill sets and they do different things well. But at the end of the day, like, they're both 3-and-D supporting guys. So I don't see why a team would be wanting to trade for both of them.
Yeah,
like, I don't
trade for 2 4s.
Yeah. I actually think like Cam's more of a 3. I think, but like same guy, like same archetype regardless. And like, I don't think contenders are going to, are going to want to make a trade like that where they're trading that much salary plus draft capital where they see where they think they're upgrading significantly by bringing in Johnson and Finney-Smith. Like, I just don't think there's a deal like that out there. I mean, it's hard enough to find some trades for one of these guys. I do think there will be trades for them. And I'm going to talk about this more on later episodes with some ideas I've been thinking about, but both of those guys, I think that it's going to be very hard. And I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a team from a asset management standpoint or a roster management standpoint. So that's not something that I really see in the cards, but I do think that there will be teams that are interested in both of those guys once we get closer to that January 15th date. It could happen sooner, but like that's when trade season really heats up. Next question, over under on games played for Ben Simmons this season. That's from Andrew Poirier. CJ, your opinion? Not the easiest exercise. I think Ben's made that clear over the last 3 years.
Under 40?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, like when I saw the question, like Ben got back surgery this offseason, and the last time we saw him get back surgery was prior to the 2022-23 season, his first year that he played with the Nets with KD and Kyrie. And that season he played in 42 games. So I think it's fair to set it around there because like the surgery that Ben had, he has this herniated disc that presses on like the nerve that's what causes the pain to like, shoot down your back and into your legs and stuff. So the surgery that he had is called a microdiscectomy, and they pretty much just cut that bulging disc. They cut a little bit of the disc out to get it to stop pressing on that nerve, so he won't have those nerve impingements, is like what we kept hearing last year. So the aim is to relieve pain. So like it is a surgery that works. Now, medical people I've talked to don't think that it long-term solves the problem, but it kind of like short-term is like a bandage a little bit. So I do think that he should be healthier this season, but saying that Ben Simmons is going to be healthier isn't saying a lot because he hasn't been healthy really at all. Last year, he played 15 games. So, CJ said 40. I think 40, 42, like half the season is like reasonable, before we get the extended absence. So we'll see. But regardless,
more than double than what he did last year.
Yeah, be like triple what he did last year, pretty much. So, and it's worth noting that last year we heard last offseason, last year he got shut down during that 2022-23 season, and then he had 7 months off. He did the rehab process. We heard in the articles with Mark Spears last offseason about how great he was feeling. And then he only played in 6 games, and then he was out for 3 months, and then he came back, and then he was out again. So it's like trying to predict Ben Simmons' health. We're doing it because you asked the question. Yeah. It's kind of a fool's errand at this point. And I don't think it has a ton of significance to the Nets because he's a guy that I don't think really anybody expects to be back with the team after this year. So, but we'll see, because it's definitely an interesting story because he is still a guy who was an electrifying player earlier in his career. So we'll see if he can regain anything along those lines. Unlikely, but how does the team proceed if it starts winning? That's from Cam Thomas Muse. I don't think either of us are worried about that, but CJ, your take.
I mean, like, the thing is,
the Nets, you know, they're going to have 4 first-round picks next year either way. So, I mean, you can conceivably, you know, make the play-in, make the playoffs, and, you know, still find good talent in a loaded draft class and, you know, start building the team that way. And the cap space will still be there. You know what I'm saying? So, you could do that. But, I mean, if I don't know, like, I think go on like a 10-game winning streak, do you just blow it up immediately, or do you like sit everyone? Like, I don't know, but I don't know. It's so hard. Like, as a former player, and you get this too, Eric, as someone who competed at a high level yourself. It's so hard because, you know, if we're up to Jordy Fernandez is not trying to tank. Dorian Smith is not trying to tank. Cam Johnson is not trying to tank. Like, these guys have pride to play for. They want to win games. They don't
play for contracts.
They have incentives to play for. These guys don't want to be known as losers and Eastern Conference bottom dwellers. So it's always tough for me talking about like tanking scenarios because I know the guys in that locker room are 100% against it. You know what I'm saying? But you know, it is what it is, and you know, I don't know if the Nets turn out to be better than expected. Maybe you pivot. You know, maybe you pivot and rebuild this team a different way. But, you know, if they're winning too much, I would just imagine that guys will start popping up with injuries and being sad and getting shipped out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about this because I just don't think that this team has enough. You know, they have talent, they have guys, but they don't have like the guys. Like they don't have the horses that you need to.
It's an island of misfit toys, is what I like to call it. They got a lot of good players in vacuums as individuals, right? They're not literally in vacuums, like in a vacuum, like this. Okay, they're not. Sean Marks isn't stuffing guys in vacuum cleaners. Yeah, right? It's all good. But you know, they have guys who are good players as individuals, but like there's no cohesiveness and connectivity between them. And there's not that one guy who kind of makes it all work. You know, last year you thought it'd be Ben Simmons, but he wasn't healthy, right? You know, this year I guess we'll see. But, you know, that's the issue with this Nets team. It's not that they're bad players. It's just the fit. The fit isn't necessarily right.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not worried about it. But if they did start winning like earlier than expected, they could be more aggressive and trade conversations for guys like Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. And regardless, like those guys are going to get moved regardless. And towards the end of the season, we've seen other teams do it. I've talked about this. Like if Cam Thomas stubs his pinky toe and comes in and his toe's bleeding a little bit, be like, hey, Cam, like, why don't you wrap that up and like put your feet up and take a few nights off? Like we know how this works.
We'll reevaluate you in 6 weeks.
Yeah. Like we know how this works with tanking teams. It's not, you know, it's how it goes, and I'm not too worried about it. So let's move on to the next question. What are some potential moves that could happen to give Killian Hayes a spot on the roster? I'll take this one because there's kind of, I feel like, a competition for the final roster spot that isn't being talked about because the Nets have their players under standard contracts who have actual guarantees, and it's 15 guys, but only one of those guys is partially guaranteed, and that's Keon Johnson, who signed a 2-year deal with the Nets after Summer League, but in the first season, only $250,000 of his salary is guaranteed. So the Nets can waive him, and he's the only guy realistically that I think they would waive. So it's kind of like him, Keon Johnson, Amari Bailey, Tyrese Martin are the guys, you know, who would be competing for that last roster spot. But you know, man, Keon looked good in Long Island last year, and Keon looked good in Summer League. And I thought that Keon looked pretty good last night when he played later on in the game. So like, and Killian didn't even play. So, you know, like the next question is, do you think Killian Hayes will join the Nets rotation this season? That's from a friend over in France, but like, he's got to play first. He didn't play in the first preseason game. And like, if we're talking about like realistically, if that conversation is between Keon Johnson and Killian Hayes for the final roster spot, we haven't seen Killian, so it's hard to say, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to beat out Keon for that spot. But what's your opinion there?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's hard to make the team on the trainer's table when at the end of the day, Killian has to go out there and earn it, especially considering, you know, the narrative surrounding him coming from Detroit. So, if he plays well, then, the Nets will have to make decisions from there. But, as of right now, just like Amari Bailey and a few other guys, he's on the outside looking in.
Yeah. And, it's worth noting also that Killian isn't eligible to sign a two-way contract because he's already played 4 seasons in the NBA. So because he can't sign that two-way, it's really like Amari Bailey and Tyrese Martin, who are the Nets' other Exhibit 10, which just means like training camp, tryout, non-guaranteed guys. Like they can sign two-ways, and Nets have a open two-way spot. So Amari Bailey could sign a two-way and stay with the Nets organization. Killian Hayes can't sign a two-way with the Nets or any other team. So that really makes his situation difficult. And like, is he a guy that has, in theory, like skills that would be nice? Like he's big, he's 6'5", 6'8" wingspan, can defend, could probably like facilitate. If
lottery pick.
Yeah, if he could develop like some other aspects of his game, but like he's a guy who just hasn't been able to shoot. And I mean, I don't really think he said he's been working on his jump shot all off season. I don't know. We saw like the free throw competition thing that I posted on Twitter. 2 guys at the bottom of that, 3 guys. It was Killian Hayes, Nick Claxton, Ben Simmons. And if you're a point guard, you don't want to be at the bottom of a free throw competition. Like that's not a good sign. And I don't think that that's necessarily, it's one free throw competition, but I don't think it's like a great sign for him being a jump shooter and developing a 3-point shot. So, if he's going to make that final roster spot, Keon Johnson would be waived, but I'm not sure that it's trending in that direction. And like Killian could go down to the G League, I guess, like if he had to, like in theory, and, stay in the Nets organization that way. But I don't know. I don't know how likely that's going to be. 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap this up. Over under 24.5 wins for the Nets this season. That's from Chris Baker. The over under for the Nets, you can get that number at 18.5 on FanDuel when I checked last week. So 24.5, the easy under for me, because I think that this team towards the end of the year is just going to be literally just like reading Jonathan Givony and going to other college games, going across the river to Rutgers to see those games. But CJ, 24.5.
Oh, man, before last night, I was in the boat that, Jordy's going to have these guys playing hard and they're going to be a lot better than a lot of people expect. And
I think they will be early on, but like,
Then they went down. Then they went down 12-0, and what transpired. So I'm gonna go with the under. Go. Now that I've seen this group, granted it's just one preseason game, but now that I've seen this group, and then granted they're not even whole, right? They're not even whole, right? But something tells me this injury bug is going to be a trend this year. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go with the under.
Yeah, and
I understand now.
Yeah, as our old
and I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist, but I understand now.
CJ is definitely an optimist, but as our old friend Kevin Durant used to say, basketball is about putting the ball in the basket. And while there's a lot of ways that you do that, the Nets don't have a lot of guys who are good at putting the ball in the basket. We don't have to overcome. We're basketball, reporters, and I like to analyze the game, but we don't have to overcomplicate this sometimes. And it's pretty much that simple. We have one more question, and it's from our friend Evan Barnes from Newsday. He says, "Can CJ outrun me to the practice facility yet?"
Evan, don't play on my name. If you watching this, don't play on my name, Evan. You know I'm still in rehab trying to get right, man. But
my question was,
I'm gonna cook you when I'm healthy, though.
My question was, with the torn Achilles, could CJ outrun Evan to the practice facility? We're talking about former Division I basketball player.
Maybe. Nah, let me stop playing. All right, I haven't even jumped in months, and I can walk quickly, but I haven't even attempted a full stride. So,
all right, well, we'll see down the line. We'll have a race and we'll post it to the Nets Twitter faithful. But CJ, appreciate you coming on, man. Appreciate you taking the time to talk some Nets ball and react to this preseason game. And I think you'll be a recurring guest throughout the season, man. So thanks, and I will see you in Brooklyn soon.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. See you soon.
That does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk with CJ. I think we hit on a lot of interesting subjects and reacted to some of the interesting things that we saw during the Nets game action with this new look roster. As I said at the top, if you don't already, make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets on all streaming platforms. Please smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, all of it. As always, I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. If you don't follow me on Twitter already, follow me at Erik Slater _. Constant news, updates, analysis, highlights, all of my work posted there. Also, you can find all of my articles on ClutchPoints.com. Nets are moving on through training camp and the preseason. That season opener against the Atlanta Hawks on October 23rd is rapidly approaching, man. So I'll have all coverage of that here on Believe in Nets moving forward. Talk to you guys soon.